DOGE has uncovered a lot of insane things over the past 3 weeks. It's felt like more like 3 years since Trump came to office, but there's been like trans operas in Siberia and DEI initiatives in Kazakhstan. But I don't think there's anything that's going to stick with me more than this image of a limestone mine in Pennsylvania, where 230 feet under the ground in a cave, 700 workers process federal employee retirements using paper by hand, which are then stored in manila envelopes and cardboard boxes. And there is this incredible Washington Post article from 10 years ago about how it's basically a limestone cave version of The Office and how all these people hate each other. And one thing I've just been thinking about a lot over the past few weeks is this sort of split screen reality that we have in American life right now, which is Washington on one side, typified by this limestone underground mine processing things on paper by hand, and then this other world, which is the world of the private sector, most notably the private sector in Silicon Valley, that is lightspeed AI, crypto, blockchain, blood boys, rockets into outer space, the future, right? And these are the two largest employers in America. And now they have met inside this new MAGA Trump coalition in Washington. And I wanted to start by asking you if you think this merger marriage is working, and what you think of this sort of strange split screen reality coming into one frame.
Yeah, well, I'm incredibly excited about DOGE. I mean, my whole personal philosophy is I'm pro-freedom. That's economic freedom, which is the mission of Coinbase, but freedom of speech, up and down the board, I'm pro-freedom. I think that's what creates civilizational progress. And so one big way you can get economic freedom is by having a smaller, more efficient government. So I am a huge supporter of DOGE. I think it's probably the most inspiring thing I've seen in government in my lifetime. And it's kind of what you touched on, which is that the government, I think the government should be really limited to setting policy, a few core functions like having courts and a military, but they're not good at building things, right? You don't want to have the government actually building fighter jets. You outsource that to the private industry. I think that we don't go far enough with that in our society. And over time, if you look at the last couple hundred years of the United States, it's the size of government measured by percentage of GDP going to government has gotten bigger and bigger. And now they're kind of running larger and larger areas of the economy, whether it's education or healthcare, banking, these things are all kind of like quasi-government. And so the US is a pretty free country, but you can think of it as a spectrum between like 100% run by the government and 100% run by the private sector. Percentage of GDP going to government in the form of taxes is kind of a way to estimate what percent socialist or communist are we, right? And it's been trending up over the last 100 or 200 years. I think that we need to cut that dramatically back. And the private industry is just far more effective at building things and running things. And we're seeing, like, if they go into the government, like you're seeing here, the amount of waste and corruption and fraud and just incompetence is staggering to anybody who's worked in the private sector.
Do you think that America was freer 100 years ago than it is today?
Yeah, I do think so. The founding, I'm not an expert on this, but I've tried to go read a little bit of the Federalist Papers and all these kind of things. But yeah, I mean, if you go back, I'd say like around 1900, I think, total revenue going to the government was maybe like 10% of GDP. And today it's probably, 3x that, at least maybe 3 to 4x that. And so we have been trending to a society that has more and more functions run by the government, and they're just less efficient. The Department of Education, for instance, it's like the test scores didn't go up and it's incredibly expensive, right? And so how do you create excellence? It's by competition. You want to have a free market of ideas where people are choosing, where to send their children or where to spend their hard-earned dollars. And competition creates that excellence to say, like, well, if there's a better product at a better price or something that I think will teach my children better, I want to have the choice to put it there. That's what's creating excellence. It's accountability through competition. The government is a monopoly. That we get the worst customer service from monopolies. Why would it be any different in government?
I think some people who are watching what DOGE is doing right now in Washington are like, their minds are blown. It seems absolutely insane. It seems revolutionary. But you can make an argument that actually what they're doing is just trying to chip away and trying to return government to what had been its rightful place.
I think that's right. If you're a regulator in the executive branch and the law is unclear, you don't just get to make up your own laws. That's not what the Constitution says. The Constitution says Congress shall make the laws. The regulators need to go enforce the laws that exist. They don't get to create new laws. And that's a good example of what we're seeing now as a transition, where all of these agencies that got created and a lot of the regulations were actually unconstitutional, and they need to get dramatically pared back.
Peter Thiel once said that people in D.C. are completely backwards. They don't understand any of the technology, and even to the extent that they can, it can't be stopped. Do you think that's true?
Directionally, he's right, yes. I do think there's very few people in D.C. who understand technology. That's a pretty uncontroversial statement. And I think even when they do try to create a barrier to it, like we saw some of these AI executive order came out of the Biden administration, which in my view was a mistake. It really said, hey, you can't have more than this number of parameters in a model, which is just like, anybody who knows anything about technology knows that Moore's law, right? It's like every 18 months, the thing gets faster, cheaper, more capable. And so they were just kind of, it showed that they didn't understand how technology worked. And I think that with the release of these open source models and then countries like China putting out these models, that's a great example of where they didn't have the ability to really control it, even if they wanted to. This debate goes back to even encryption in the early days, right? Where encrypted messaging apps are now kind of like ho-hum, kind of boring everyday stuff. But
like Signal, like you're talking about things like Signal.
Yeah, Signal, WhatsApp, even iMessage is encrypted now, where when they subpoena Apple, I don't think they have the ability to get it. There's always some debate about, does the NSA have some secret backdoor? But as a broad, when encryption first came out, people were kind of afraid, oh, this is all going to be used by terrorists and everything like that. And so it's usually something like protecting the children or terrorism is the fear-mongering piece of it. But encryption is a powerful technology that it got out there. Governments, I don't think, had fully the ability to control it. And this is good. I mean, I hate to say it in some ways, but we wouldn't have this level of progress in society if everything that government wanted to do actually stopped it in its tracks. Innovation keeps moving forward, and that's very important for civilizational progress.
So you're bullish on the idea that DOGE, led by Elon, can drag the federal government into, I don't even know if it's the future, but the present.
Yeah, I mean, this is not like dragging it into the future would be like, let's put all federal spending on a blockchain so you can have total transparency. It's an immutable ledger, corruption proof. That would be a massive undertaking because all their systems are kind of ancient. I think he's trying to do just much more basic things like, hey, let's actually have a category code on each of these payments, or make sure that payments to unauthorized recipients are blocked, and just kind of basic accounting principles, reconciliation, etc. So I think what they're trying to do is just get some of the very basic ideas working. And anybody who's worked in private industry had to kind of go in there and clean up something in a company knows this firsthand. There's a concept called like zero-based budgeting, right? Where you come in with a fresh perspective and you say, okay, how many IT people should we have here? How many customer support people should we have? Instead of just every year someone asks for a little bit more budget because that's the default state of everything. It wants to grow in its scope. And that's a really hard thing to do, but companies that don't do it eventually are unprofitable or die or go bankrupt. And so that's the natural way that these things get weeded out in the private sector. In the government, there is no accountability mechanism like that. It can persist for decades or centuries, especially if you have the reserve currency that you can print and just get away with total lack of accountability on things. So in part, this is what the beauty of Bitcoin, right? It's kind of saying, hey, like if you're worried about the inflation of the dollar and deficit spending and money printing, there's a refuge from inflation. And I do think actually crypto is going to be very good for the United States and for the dollar, because through USDC and kind of a digital dollar is going to help it maintain the reserve currency. But I also think Bitcoin is going to serve as a very important check and balance on inflationary spending and money printing.
Hey guys, Barry here. I hope you enjoyed that clip from the latest episode of Honestly. If you want to watch the full conversation and support the work that we do here at the Free Press of fearless, independent journalism, subscribe today at the top link in this video's description, or just go to thefp.com/join.